It is time for Tim Talk. I'm Zach Martin on the Big Fat American Radio Network. We've got a lot going on. We're now available on Stitcher. It was a big deal to Timothy, got in contact with me over the past weekend. Are we on Stitcher? I said, yeah, I believe we're applying for that. I followed up, and there we are. We're available at Stitcher. We're on Spotify. We're on iTunes, which I guess is going to have a different name. It's Apple Podcast. Just subscribe to Big Fat American. We're on TuneIn. Still to come, radio.com, possibly iHeart, and I think a few other areas or a few other places you can find us. And don't forget, you can always follow us at facebook.com/BigFatAmerican and go to the website, ZachMartinRocks.com. You can also follow me at Twitter at ZachMartinRock. So please subscribe, download, and listen to Tim Talk. On today's episode, we've got 5 different things we want to talk about. Number 1, how do we stop the bullying, shaming, and abusive families dealing with health issues?
This topic is near and dear to my heart, and it just is antithetical to the whole issue where there's anti-bullying campaigns, be nicer, be kind, all these songs, everybody's be happy, and yet the groups that claim that they're going to put forth the anti-bullying message are out there bullying the parents. So they're absolutely ignoring what the parents are saying. They won't let them share their voice. Part of recovery in any sort of addiction or form of abuse or PTSD is talking about your situation in a group and letting it out. One of the things that happens when you have an injury that the medical community has caused, they won't let you talk about it. You're not allowed to talk about it on television, mainstream media, or publicly. Anywhere you're not allowed to share your story, they come back and say, you just imagine what happened to your child, carry on, and the resources that are provided to families dealing with medical injury is just as limited as possible. Everything is a fight to get there, and the arrogance and the attitude we just have to do something about. So I just wanted to spend a couple minutes today saying, hey, what do we do about this?
Well, there's a couple facets about bullying. First off is the tactic of, dismissing or scapegoating. And what I mean by dismissing, it would be labeling somebody. Like the Nazis would label a certain segment of the population and show them as rats and dehumanize them. So we see this by having anti-vaxxers as a major worldwide threat, as opposed to nuclear weapons or biochemical weapons or any of the things that are created in a laboratory that can destruct a civilization or create chaos like that, kill a bunch of people, genocide, whatever you want to call it. You get labeled as a threat or stupid. You're automatically stupid. What an idiot. Conspiracy theorist. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a conspiracy theorist. Conspiracies are, in fact, crimes. And what that means is that you engage with other people to commit said crime. And then the conspiracy theory is, well, what's really behind this particular action or this particular crime? For instance, JFK to this day and RFK is still listed as a conspiracy theory. We don't have a final answer. We have a Warren report, and then you see all the conflicting information, and in movies like JFK, which make you question, and then you get insulted for questioning the story that you've been told. You're not allowed to have any sort of, critical thinking skills. At the same time, when you're going through school and when you get into business, all you're asked about is your ability to think critically. Do you have critical thinking skills? It's usually part of an interview. So these are the facets, the labeling and the dehumanizing of people and scapegoating. Then you have something else in regard to bullying, which is kind of going overboard. Dodgeball is the latest article I read, that dodgeball is seen as bullying. Well, okay. I always looked at it as a fun game to play. Then there's kill a guy with the ball. Remember that, Timothy? I used to play kill a guy with the ball. But dodgeball, kill a guy with the ball.
I was the guy that always got killed.
Right. So there's an essence, I guess, or you might say there's a part about those two examples of playing around that could go off into bullying. But then again, as I thought about this, aren't all sports a little bit of bullying, a little bit of intimidation? You have the intimidation factor. How is it being on the football field when you're trying to kill the other guy, not in the same sort of class as dodgeball? You're trying to stop that guy on the other side, or you're trying to impose your will on that guy on the other side. And if you've ever watched professional football, you really try to hit him as fast and as hard and as brutal as you possibly can. That transcends sports. It's even seen in NASCAR, where somebody gets a little bit aggravated by what happened on the track and retaliation of a spin out. They get out of the cars, they start, hitting each other. So bullying, if you want to call it that, is part of sport. It's the I guess you would have to say, control your aggression, manage your anger. Anger's okay.
And that kind of leads into the next topic, but that controlling of aggression, I have a theory about the whole sports thing, because we've gone so mamby-pamby and participation trophy, and sports used to be an outlet for boys and girls to get rid of that extra energy and that emotional extra. And now we've gone to the point where we're so closed off and so controlled, and everybody has to win and everybody has to get a participation trophy, that you don't get that chance to really, do that full check on the opponent and win the game, even if it's just outside the rules.
Well, I think we have to, as parents, explain to our kids that not everybody, we're all supposed to be treated equally. But in many ways, we're not really all born equal, are we? We have different kinds of genetics. We have different strengths, different weaknesses. You might have a disability, as some might want to describe it as. So we're all, should be treated equally. I guess you say we are created equally, but then, after birth, everything is unequal. I mean, there's no panacea. There's no utopia on this planet. The utopia is in the kingdom of heaven, as I believe and as Timothy believes. Having said that, the onus is on the parents to make sure that our kids understand fair play, about standing up for the weaker, and without being condescending about it, without being, I guess making the other person feel bad about it. You just got to use some wisdom. I don't think we spend enough time exploring the idea of wisdom. And how do you attain wisdom? Well, that's through age and knowledge and paying attention to what's going around you, and good coaching. We do have some resources for that. The Positive Coaching Alliance, we'll get to that one other time. You can find the podcast at Big Fat American on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, and various other, platforms. Check that out. It's with Daryl Johnson, and it goes over these very topics that we're discussing right now. Let's get to number 2, going international. Now, before we get to the meat and bones of this one about Dr. Wakefield in Poland, Robert F. Kennedy in Samoa, I will say that I found something very interesting before I went to Germany. I saw an article, maybe in the New York Times, about this epidemic of measles in Europe. And it was, I guess, in the United States to get everybody to comply with the vaccination, to get mandated vaccinations, to make people start demonizing others and pointing the finger. We got that problem over there. We don't want it over here. We got to do something. We got to do something about this epidemic of measles. It's not Ebola. I remember when we were treating an Ebola patient, we brought him into this country. I thought to myself, that is the craziest thing I've ever heard. And people that are, pro-vaccinations, they were okay with that. It's like kind of a hypocritical way of looking at things. Anyway, when I got to Europe, there was no word of this epidemic. There was no word about the measles, and they didn't even discuss vaccines. Everybody was just doing whatever they do, in Germany, drinking beer, eating a pretzel, having some sausage, and meeting up at the park for Ingress, which is a really interesting game if you ever played it, and Pokemon, things like that. But nowhere was that being discussed. And we have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in Samoa. We have Dr. Wakefield in Poland. What are these guys up to?
Well, just to address your first point, the word is endemic. That means that in Europe and other nations, other continents around the world, that measles is just everywhere. I mean, to the tune of hundreds of thousands of cases of measles a year. And so the United States, one of the new things you'll hear in the next week coming up is that they're afraid of their status of no measles in the United States being taken away. And when they say back to 2000, that's when they did away with measles in the United States. They still had a few cases that year. But the United States can have up to 2,001 cases, and they still consider the United States not having measles. So right now, we're at about 1,000 cases reported for the year 2019. But remember, measles takes like a week and a half to get better from. So even though they're saying 1,000 cases in the United States in 2019, 90% of those cases have recovered with nobody going to the hospital or no issues. I mean, they would have instantly reported somebody dying from the measles or somebody having a bad episode at the hospital. That would have been headline news, wouldn't it?
Yes. Well, let me ask you a couple questions. If there were no measles in the year 2000, let's call it that, no measles in the year 2000. Think about what they are reporting. No measles in the year 2000 in the United States. How did the measles get into the United States recently?
Pretty much everything has come back from either a visitor coming from a foreign country or somebody going over there and getting it and then coming back.
Mm-hmm. If in 2000 most of our populace was vaccinated, thus wiping out measles, then that would tell me we have herd immunity. So how is it possible if somebody doesn't have any contact with anybody outside their community that they would get measles now?
Well, they've discovered that 28% of the people in the Disneyland outbreak had the vaccine strain of the virus. So it's actually the MMR vaccine is a live vaccine, so it's giving you a reduced impact version of the vaccine, but then some people can actually of the antigens, but some people can actually get the measles from the vaccine. And so we're finding out about 30% of the people now are actually having vaccine strain measles.
Now I've heard people say that I got my vaccination for measles when I was a kid, and you people better get vaccinated because the virus mutates. Therefore, if you say that statement, if you make that statement, you're not really, I guess, immune from these mutant measles viruses, are you?
We've never had anywhere close to what they call it, the 95% magic number. I mean, and you got to remember that number has gone steadily upwards. It started at 70, 80%, and it was considered the natural immunity from the natural disease. Mm-hmm. So it never has been really applied or studied from the vaccine. But when they use the 95% magic number, they're talking about 95% of children. So more than half of all adults are way behind on all their adult vaccines. So there's not even close to 95% when you're talking about the whole entire population.
Is herd immunity a theory or is it an actual law?
It's an absolute. I would use the word myth. Okay. I mean, there's no such thing as herd immunity. They don't even want to use the word herd immunity anymore. They call it community immunity now. Mm-hmm. And it just, if you go to try and peg it down to what percentage, like I said, it's gone from 70, 80, 85, 90, 95, and now they want 98% mm-hmm. of the kids vaccinated. So why does the number keep changing? And why do outbreaks sporadically still happen, even in pockets where they have that magic number with the kids?
I see. Let's talk about what is going on with Dr. Wakefield in Poland and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in Samoa.
I just wanted to mention how the American influence is worldwide and how what goes and kind of starts in the United States permeates out through the rest of the world. My advocacy has never been getting into the discussion about whether a vaccine is needed and necessary in a third world country. When you don't have clean water, sanitation, proper nutrition, nasty diseases really influence your daily life. And so if the vaccine was something that could help individuals in those communities, I'm of the opinion that you should work on the nutrition and the sanitation and the living environment before you give the vaccines. But if that helps, I don't get in the middle of that discussion. But recently, around the world, different countries have been having the pharmaceutical influence. Bill Gates' group has gone over to India and tried to push some vaccines and actually got sued over it. And different places around the world. Well, now the pro-health side is actually putting their message out, and you'll see the people wearing yellow vests all around the world. And Poland last week had a very large protest, which Dr. Wakefield went to and was interviewed and said some really cool things. And I put out on social media some clips of those. And then RFK Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr. went to Samoa to meet with an Australian advocate, Taylor Winterstein, and it's just interesting to see how now we're going beyond the borders of the United States to talk about health in general.
Are there any vaccines in your mind that are good and actually do work?
Well, that question is very broad, and if there was a pandemic, I was asked this question last week, if there was a pandemic, epidemic where people were dying around me, I would consider taking a vaccine. Every single drug has effects or side effects, and you have to make that decision for yourself if that is something that you want to avoid. I personally feel like measles is something I could recover from and keep going. Chicken pox, as in Britain, UK, don't even give a vaccine for that. They just tell you to stay home and get better. So personally, there's very few vaccines that I would just jump up and say, oh, that's a good one. Mm-hmm. It's very, of the research that I've done for myself, I can't give a recommendation in a positive manner for any of them. But again, I'm not a doctor. I'm a dad asking questions, so I face these things one at a time. I know that Tanner has a medical exemption, which means he's had impacts from vaccines that doctors have said happen. So when it came around for getting the meningitis vaccine going into his senior year, I said no, because most of the cases of meningitis happen when you're in an army barracks or you're in a college dorm.
That's right.
That cause lots of problems. So I chose to not give that vaccination to Tanner when he went through his senior year because of the medical exemption and because of where his trajectory put him. He wasn't going to an army barracks or a dorm. He was going to stay in the middle of the bean field where he has very little interaction with possible getting those things.
And I think that's fair enough. It's always about risk analysis, reading the labels, what kind of reactions you've had in the past, what's your quality of life now, what are some of the risks that if you don't get vaccinated, what they could be. What are the adverse effects of the vaccination or the medication for that matter? I take a medication for one thing, like high blood pressure, and then I have a side effect that needs a medication to deal with that. Sooner or later, I just would like to get out of having to take any of these medications. And what I've done on my part is I've gone more vegan, not quite like Timothy Welsh. I've, on occasion will have some meat. I'm very careful with that. And I'm trying to the best of my ability, I think I do a pretty good job, avoid simple carbs, carbohydrates, and sugar, because sugar, especially the processed sugar, is really bad for you. You want to talk a little bit about how sugar should really be avoided? I do know that. I've read articles before you pick up where I'm going to leave off. I've read articles where sugar actually fuels cancer cells. But why don't you give us a little bit of your, position on sugar?
I will, but I just have to say one last thing about the last topic. All the questions you raised are great questions that you should be having conversations with your medical professional about. And what we need to fight against is the corporatization and the governmentization of your doctor-patient privilege. When the government takes the right of your doctor to diagnose away from you, and the corporation takes the time away from your doctor, that's when medical errors happen. And
that's
so
right.
You need to force your doctor to answer all those questions that you just raised that probably is a 15, 30-minute discussion. You need to have those with your doctor, even though he or she only gives you 5-10 minutes when they come in the door.
Well, and if you ever read history books, controlling the healthcare was one of the major tactics of the Nazi Party. Just think about that for a second before you think it's such a great idea to have a national health coverage or a national health kind of, I guess NIH is what they have in England. It's not a panacea, my friends. It's not an answer to all of the troubles. Here's the other thing, and we'll get to the sugar for a second. Don't listen to what you see and hear and read from media. They've been doing such a bad job for so long, and so many of the media, quote-unquote, professionals are so biased in everything that they do, it clouds their judgment, and it definitely clouds their reporting, and it, for the most part, can't be trusted. So if you really want to know what's finding out, you're going to have to do, it's called due diligence, and research it yourself. Other than that, you might as well just ignore it because it's not going to add or subtract to your life. So let's talk about the bad impact of sugar.
Well, trying to improve my lifestyle and try to improve my health through natural means as far as diet and exercise, one of the things that I eliminated about 2 years ago was the added sugar in my life. Now, there's some processed food that it sneaks in. There's some foods that I sneak from Tanner where I have it. But as far as going out of my way and having sugar, I don't. And, of course, one of the things we always say is, correlation may not be causation. But this week I was feeling pretty good, and I thought, well, I just crave something sweet. So I started having sugar for a day or two in my coffee and having a sweet roll and just kind of going off the sugar thing for a little bit. Lo and behold, for the first time in almost a year and a half, I get the worst sore throat that I've had in a year and a half. Now, I have done the strips. I don't know if you know about this, but if you keep your body in an alkaline state, it helps your body kill the bugs that are bad, that attack you. And when you start pouring the sugar into your body, it makes you go the opposite direction and sets up an environment where bugs say, "Ooh, whoopee, let's grow. We've got some food, we've got some intake, we're ready to go." And that's when they jump at the opportunity to get. So seeing that firsthand this week, I just wanted to put that on the list to discuss what your thoughts are about refined sugar.
Well, I think there's a time and place for everything, and if it's once in a while, once in a blue moon, where you're having a piece of cake, that's fine. If you're having some pudding, whatever you like that gives you that, fulfills the need of your sweet tooth, it's all right once in a while. But to do it on a daily basis is really where it's dangerous. The other thing that you want to avoid are the diet sodas as well as regular sugary sodas. Try the carbonated waters like Perrier, and then have a little bit of a lemon flavor. Those are better choices. And I would say that you have to be moderate with all things. I like my tuna. I don't use mayonnaise for my tuna. I use a golden, like a dark brown German type of mustard. And I know that a lot of those fishes like mahi-mahi and tuna have traces of mercury, and it can give you brain fog. So I would be careful with everything that you eat, everything in moderation. I've seen overweight people that only eat vegetables, but it's what they put on the vegetables, and they eat a lot of them. So you can overeat and gain weight doing that. It's just be careful. Everything in moderation. That's my answer to that. Let's talk about flip-floppy politicians, including New York Assemblyman Dinowitz. flipping off parents. Now, think about this for a second. Our mentality of our relation to the people that represent us and the way they view us. We do not have a ruling class in the United States of America. They are not our bosses. We don't follow them. They represent us. That's the distinction. They are not qualified to rule you. The only qualified person that really rule you is God. And when I say our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, you might have a different belief system, but that's the only exception to that. So don't think of them as your benevolent rulers. They're far from benevolent, and they're not your rulers, and they're definitely not part of any quote-unquote ruling class. I think we've got to do a better job as far as demanding term limitations and make sure that we get those. If we have it for the president, it should be in the Senate, it should be in the House, because if we had term limits on all of those levels, whether it's federal, state, or local, then we would probably not be in the mess we are today. Now, look at what goes on in Congress. They get absolutely nothing done. They've been fighting over the legitimacy of this president for almost 3 years now. And even after the report comes out, it wasn't what they expected, so let's keep going for more and trying to, quote-unquote, impeach the president. Now, let me explain this. And if you already know this, I don't have to explain it to you. But impeachment does not mean that the person that's being impeached is removed from office. Impeachment is like an indictment. It's the first part of the process, actually probably the second part of the process. And then the Senate hears the case, and the Senate decides whether the person being impeached, indicted, should be removed from office. It's never happened in the United States. 2 presidents have been impeached. Andrew Johnson, after Lincoln, and William Jefferson Clinton. So please stop with the impeachment thinking that you take the person out of office. That's balderdash. You are so way off on civics that it's embarrassing. So stop. All right, go ahead, Timothy.
Yeah, I was going to mention a lot of people forget Bill Clinton in that situation. But the topic is kind of connected to the bullying of parents again. The behavior of the politicians are really just kind of out of control. Back to your kind of media thing, one of the hobbies I have is that we have so many of these teleprompter anchors that they just read the feed as it comes through, and it's interesting to see what they say on one thing. They'll say something totally different on another thing, but you can extrapolate what they're saying back to the health issues. And it's the same thing with the politicians. Is in one room they'll say one thing to one person, in another room they'll say another thing to another person, and it is just out of control as far as their behavior and their political talking points. Now you see me, now you don't. I do a little sidestep to quote Best of the Whorehouse in Texas. The politicians just feel like they're like absolutely what you said, a ruling class, all the way through all of the politicians that are out there. And it's time that we rebuke them in such a way that we hold their feet to the flame and make them speak the truth and make them pass laws that support the rights that we have. Once those rights are gone, they're gone. Very seldom do rights that you give up come back to you in a way that you had before. The law of the land still is, the majority is that you have the right to have a philosophical exemption to medical procedures. You have a right to religious exemption to procedures, and you have a right to medical exemption procedures. To vilify people and make them like, oh, we're going to put parents in jail over this is just way out of bounds.
Well, if they put me in jail, I would just say, no, I'm not in your jail. You're in with me. I would turn the tables out. I'm not easily intimidated on that level. Now, with that in mind, about our relationship with politicians, it's up to each and every one of us. Don't waste your time fighting with people you don't know on Facebook to make your point. You need to pick up, if you have the time to post anything on Facebook, before you get around to even doing that, I suggest having a dialogue with your local representative first and foremost. That's the first step you take. And then if you need to, you keep going to the higher offices. It's okay to leave a message for the President of the United States. You can call up the White House. I mean, we can get you the number if you wanted to. Ask Google what the number is. You'll find it. And they have a comment line, and you can leave your comment. Sometimes the operator will answer the phone, and they'll write your message. So it's really important to be involved. You just don't show up once or twice a year to cast your vote and think, all right, I'm done. It's somebody else's problem. It's not somebody else's problem. It's your problem. One of the things that we got to get touch upon one of these episodes is eugenics and this misuse of abortion and euthanasia. I just read an article, a 17-year-old in Belgium, and I knew that this was going to happen eventually, who had a traumatic experience growing up, has decided and has gotten permission to be euthanized. So she's going to kill herself. She might have already done it. It starts out with this. Death with dignity. I'm a hospice chaplain. There's no such thing. I can go down the list of what happens. Hold on one second, please. I was going to cough. Anyway, there's no such thing as death with dignity. And I won't even go into that. Won't go down there. The right to die. Again, you have a right to live, not a right to die. Just think about that for a second. It's a death culture. So it starts out with death with dignity, then euthanasia for terminally ill patients. Then it's euthanasia for critically ill patients. Then it's euthanasia for people who are clinically depressed, all on the adult level. Then it seeps over to children with a terminal illness, children with critical illness, which could be somebody, you might say, with Down syndrome. How about that? Then it's, depression. And the next thing you know, people without any input whatsoever are being euthanized because, in our judgment, in the judgment of the state, that person does not have a quality of life. And in a socialist environment, that person cannot do anything to help us out. There's no input to our work economy, so off with them. And if you don't think it can happen here, guess again. This idea that, it could only happen 75 years ago in Nazi Germany, it never happened in the United States, is, again, I'm going to use the word balderdash. It can't happen here that the United States falls apart like the Soviet Union. Again, what are we, better than everybody else throughout the world? And we can't possibly be wrong, and our country can't possibly become communist. Look, if it happens in China, if it happens in Russia, if it happens in Germany, if it happened, the fall of the Roman Empire happened in the year 455 or whatever exact the final date was. If it happened then, if it happened there, it can always happen here and in this time. So just don't take it for granted that our rights are guaranteed by any means. If we don't take part in the process to make sure that we stand up for our rights, if we stay silent when we see the abuse and this disrespect for other people and the bullying and we do nothing about it, then we're complicit, aren't we? How about
you're absolutely right that those topics you just brought up are not only another show but another whole series. Back to the first 2 points is two things that come to mind. Is one, years ago they did this campaign, See Something, Say Something, and I actually called the FBI and talked about some of the things that were going on in the health freedom world, and that was one of the best interactions, and just makes me feel good that I have a benchmark where I called the FBI, I reported the crimes that I saw. What they do about it from there, again, it's kind of like turning things over to God. It's God's timing as far as when something happens, it takes the weight off of your shoulders. So the same way with politicians. Next Monday, I have a meeting with my new state representative, and my wife and my peers say, well, why are you meeting with him? He's a conservative Republican in a very liberal state. Nothing he does or says really makes a difference. And my response to that is, in this environment where you have a supermajority that is Democratic, those people still are interacting and talking with the Republicans. They don't shove the Republicans over in a closet and say, oh, we don't know who you are. They still get their turn to speak on the floor. So what my goal is when I'm going to meet with my representative next week is to provide myself as a resource person as far as the health freedom issues, as far as autism, and the expertise that I've gathered up in the last 16 years. And so that's the reason we keep these lines open, that there is always a check and balance in everything that happens. There's a reason why the House impeaches and the Senate actually follows through on the impeachment. Everything has a check and balance, that it doesn't become a total political witch hunt because of the checks and balances, because of the court system, because of the House, the Senate, and the executive branch. We have different branches that kind of balance each other out.
Right, and I would say one of the most powerful is given to the people in the legislative branch. And we're not holding them accountable. Instead, everybody's fighting on who the president is, right? So the president can only go so far. And if the legislator got their stuff together and they were really held accountable, then even if the president was to veto the law that's on his desk or her desk, the legislature can overturn the veto. So that's the one advantage of the legislative branch over the other two branches. Now, as we are working against the clock here, it's almost time for me to go. I got another show to do. One thing that we wanted to bring up, and this is advice from Timothy's Corner on Tim Talk on the Big Fat American Radio Network, maintaining your temper in the middle of a total bleep storm, tips for guys. So, Tim, give us some tips about how not to lose it.
This topic is near and dear to my heart because one of the things I've noticed with my personality is I've become a storage tank for emotions that I've repressed, and then I all of a sudden have that psychology 101 bucket dumping, and that poor soul that happens to be at the end of the line who gets the bucket dumped upon really gets it. And I realized it's been a while since I bucket dumped, and so I just wanted to have a little discussion about how we as guys, in a world where we are the political outcasts, we're the ones that right now are the low person on the totem pole, and of course we get that feedback, oh, poor white guy with all your privilege, being painted into a corner, and that's another topic too. But how do we maintain that emotional balance and without exploding in an environment in everything from every angle seems to be turning against us and attacking us at the moment?
Okay, so what are some tips?
Well, again, looking at the bigger picture for me is realizing, turning to faith, praying about it, meditating. One of the things that leads to that emotional outburst is, again, lack of sleep, out of balance, being sick, stress. When, in my case, the last week, the 2 cars have been totaled, the roof has been totaled, being sick and having the stresses of Tanner's seizures on a daily basis, those things all add up. And so I just wanted to put out there that realizing that you're not alone in this journey and getting a peer group to vent about it. You and I off air vent about things that are happening in our lives, and that really helps de-escalate things, because you're going through things that I don't tell you I'm necessarily going through, and I tell you things that I'm going through that you realize, well, that can help you, and that just kind of helps you talk you, they say, off the ledge. I don't like that term, but it is of a ledge of having an explosion, as guys do when they get to that fight or flight time when it's time to fight.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. There are a couple takeaways and additions that I would like to add to what Timothy is saying on Tim Talk right here on the Big Fat American Radio Network. I'm Zach Martin. That you have to discover who you are. Who you are, and then this is especially true for men, is not what you do. What you do is how you earn a living. Who you are is something that you really have to discover along the way, and you'll be happier. Stop the comparison game about what others have or what others don't have on Facebook or other social media platforms. Stop trying to be the other guy or wanting to be the other guy. Stop thinking that you should be in charge of the whole situation, or you deserve the promotion, or you got it so bad. You got to stop those negative thoughts. one way to manage that kind of stuff is to make sure that you talk to your priest, rabbi, or minister on a regular basis. I tell people, as an Orthodox priest, if they came to see me for confession on a regular basis, they would save a $35 to $45 copay, and they would have a lot healthier and happier lives. The other thing that is very important and incumbent upon all of us is that the problems are not somebody else's problems. If you see something, do something. So we're like, see something, say something. See something, do something. Take some action, whatever it might be. Maybe make somebody who's able to deal with that situation aware of it so that they can attend to it. You've done your job in that part of it. As far as what we're doing here to help people living on the spectrum and people with other disabilities and the primary caregivers, is we're in the process of putting together Big Fat American Media. I don't know if that'll be the end name of it, but that's the plan. And we're going to make online radio stations. We're going to do podcasting. We're going to have some websites, all operated by people either living on the spectrum with some form of disability or the primary caregiver. Hopefully that leads to not only added income to the household, but hopefully we'll be able to figure out how to provide some sort of benefits. In other words, health coverage. That would be the long-term objective with that. On the other side of it, we're planning on putting together assisted living communities, a more upscale environment for people living on the spectrum with various disabilities that isn't demeaning and is comfortable, healthy, where you could actually do your job from that location. If you don't have people to care for you, they'll be staffed with professionals, help you with medical issues, whatever it might be. So much like you would see in those retirement homes or assisted living communities or 55-plus communities, we're going to develop that, the hope is anyway, develop that for people on the spectrum and various other disabilities. So that's what we're working on. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Really important. Tell all your friends. Share Tim Talk with your friends. And the other various interviews that are available on Big Fat American, which you can find at Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, I guess whatever they're going to call it, iPod, the podcast. Subscribe to that. Download. It's very important for you to download. You'll see it at Big Fat American, which is available at Facebook.com/Big Fat American. We're at Zach Martin Rocks, ZachMartinRocks.com. We're going to have more websites to be named later. And, of course, you can follow Real Tanner's dad, which is Timothy Walsh. If there's anything else I missed, please add it right now, Timothy, because we're running out of time.
Just use the @ symbol and Tanner's dad, and I'll talk to you whatever form you use.